that clock fast or isn't that right?
So it's about right.
The Metro bus long Olympic
About
is
right.
the
You're the minion maker. Look at that. You made the minion.
Olympic in La Cienega.
Good.
And we pull the cord and say, stop requested. Lazy to rewrite it.
Now, where's your partner?
You went on a longer.
No. The rabbi is 10.
Yeah,
I'm in the room, and the rabbi is 10. Went on a longer
I
walk.
went on a long one.
I'm glad someone's keeping track.
Well, that's what you like to do. I remember that. I watched Scooby Creek. On occasion, donuts on Friday night we got.
They don't believe in my coffee.
You wouldn't have something to complain about.
They have hot water. And tea bag. I don't drink coffee. Ugh, I don't drink this stuff, so I don't like the smell.
But they do the coffee.
I wish I don't drink coffee.
Wake up.
No, it does not help you wake up. It puts you to sleep.
Because I drink it, I kept all night.
My husband's
Oh,
good.
what's happening? What?
My husband's good.
Yeah.
This is what would come in handy for shop wood.
It'll come in handy for
What?
it's hard on fast days, it's hard to get one.
Right. I mean, the actual copy itself is coming in handy for shop wood. Being up all
For
night.
staying up all night, yeah. But on fast days, I do my neighbor's trick. It's the last thing I have before the fast. I'm very thankful for coffee with 2 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But yeah, I do have, she just went to the restaurant.
Okay. That's not like hands again?
No. I'm saying recommend so those are two that are sometimes combined, right? But not always.
My tongue must say correct. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Are there actually others that are sometimes the same way?
Many. Depends on the calendar. Like this one, where we're Chukad Balak, sometimes it's combined, sometimes separate. Kadoshim, Acharim Kadoshim, sometimes separate, sometimes combined. Depends on how many
In the
Shabbos.
same year?
What do you mean?
Meaning the pairs. Where they combine them, do they do that combination in the same year?
It all depends on how many, if it's a leap year, it depends on how many second day yontifs were Shabbat, such that in Israel they would have read the next parsha, but we read yontif readings and therefore we had to catch up. So there are many factors that determine it. Sometimes all of them are double, sometimes very few of them are double. Because like if it's not a leap year, right, and there were no yontif Shabbases, then there's no reason for an extra parsha because every Shabbat, we have to actually get through them all. If it's a leap year and there are 6 Shabbos that are yontif, then you need to double up to be able to get to the Zara Bracha on time. There's probably a more complicated pattern, but that's it in a nutshell. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Those here in person, those joining on Zoom. We're going to begin Shabbos Mincha. 2:14 in the Lev Shalem. 2:26 in Slim Shalom. Thank you, Joey. And 5:58 in Sim Shalom. Alan, you're going to lead. I'll give you a talus.
אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יהלוך סלה. אמרו לו, השם של אדוני אלוהיו, תהילה לדוד. תהילת ידע בפיו, יברך בשר השם קודשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נחיה מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה, ובא לציון גואל. ואתה קודש יושב תהילות ישראל, וכרזל זה ואמר, קדוש קדוש קדוש, אדוני צבאות מלך הארץ כבודו. ותישאני רוח ושמך וקורש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. תיתן אמת ליעקב, חסד לאברהם, אשר נשבעת לאבותינו מימי קדם. ויבטחו בך ידי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני. אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה ויאדיר. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברכיותי והמליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון, ובחיי דחו בישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב, אמרו אמן. יש ברבם מבורך, לעולם עולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתמר ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קודשה בריחו. לאלה מגדול ברכתה ושירתה, תושבתה ונחמתה, תמרן בעלמה, ואמרו אמן. ואני תפילתי לך אדוני עד רצון, אלוהים ברוב חסדך, הנני באמת אישך. ויהי בנצור אהרון, ויאמר משה, קום אדוני ויחפצו אויביך, וינוסו משנאיך מבניך. כי מציון תצא תורה, דבר אדוני מירושלים, ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו ישראל, בקדושתו. גדלו אדוני כי דרומה שלו יחדיו.
ותפארת והנצח יהדות, ככל השמיים והארץ, נתן לנו הארץ, don't put it down yet.
I always get confused which way you want it facing, out or in.
Facing that way, but hold on one second.
Sure.
Rabbi, do you want to take the plastic off of the tables and turn it over and lay it on top of that? Make sure it doesn't subdue.
What do we think? Think we should do that?
You have another towel?
I think it's okay.
Let's just put it on this side over here. Let's put this over here.
Whatever you wish to do.
Okay. Okay. Is anyone assigned to read Torah today? Okay then. Hold on tight, folks.
Am I on this side or that side?
You can choose.
Okay, which way is the Gabbai Sheni supposed to stand? Does it matter?
Usually Gabbai Sheni would be here.
Oh, okay.
Gabbai Rishon there. No. Yeah, Gabbai Rishon here, Gabbai Sheni there.
Okay.
Larry, do you want to Gabbai Rishon? Sure. While I learn the reading.
You wanna take this?
I'm just gonna use this. We'll see what happens.
There's only one off the page.
You can announce it.
Okay. We'll be on page 918 with Parshat Pinchas. For those of you on Zoom, if you're using an Anei Chaim Chumash, look for chapter 25, verse 10 of the book of Numbers.
Balak, right?
Balak.
Balak, sorry, I was wrong. I confused this morning being Chukah. That's right, okay. Page 894. 894, I went too far, okay. That's right.
ותגלה ותראה מלכותו לזמן קרוב, ויחום פליטת עמו בישראל, לכן חסר רחמים ורצון ונאמר אמן, הכל הבוגר אלוהינו ותנו כבוד לתורה. You know?
No.
Oh. AJ, תעמוד,
Amiti Yael.
עמיתי יעל,
Told the Zoomers.
בת אברהם ומרתליה, ראשון, ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו. ואתם בדבקים בנעליכם,
One second here. Sorry, Zoomers, I was wrong. We're in Balak, which is on page 894 in the Chaim, or second, on the 22nd chapter of the book of Numbers, verse 2.
Baruch Adonai
Baruch
Hamurach.
Baruch
Baruch Adonai Hamurach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayar Balak ben Tzipor ed kol asher asa Israel emori vayagar Moav mipnei ha'am od ki ravu vayakotz Moav mipnei bnei Israel vayomer Moav aziknei Midyan ata yilachachu akahal et kol svivotav kilcho hashor ata yilachachu akahal et kol svivotenu kilcho hashor et yerek hasadeh uvalak ben Tzipor melech leMoab beitahi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
תעמוד. מיכאל קדוש? בן שלמה ושרה הכהן. שני.
No, you don't need it for Mincha.
894, verse 5.
Baruch Adonai Baruch.
Baruch Adonai Baruch
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayishlach malachim el Bilam ben Beor Petorah asher ala nahar et bnei amo likrolo lemor Hine am yatsa mimitzrayim v'hine chisat ein haaretz v'hu yoshev mimuli v'yata lachana orali et ha'am hazeh ki atzum hu mimeni ulai uchal nakebo ba'agarshenu min haaretz
Ki yadati et asher tevarech mevorach v'asher ta'or you are vayelechu ziknei Moab v'ziknei Midian uksamim biadam vayavo el Bilam vayedebru elav divrei Balak.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Dove Bear. Is that redundant?
Call him Zev Wolf instead.
And Shmuel Issachar HaKohen.
Shlishi.
Shlishi.
Let's pause to Mishaber for Cholim while I learn the third Aliyah. We'll pause to Mishaber for Cholim. Do you want to do it? Joey? You do it, Larry? I need that.
I'll give it right back.
I need it now.
Okay. I'll find it.
Hold on. This is a circus today.
Yeah, but here's different Shabbat morning.
Okay. Here, you can have this.
Okay. Yisha Berach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rachel Rachel Leah Hu Yivarech v'Yirapeh et
Jody Myers, Matthew Horton, David Ornan, Alan Oshua.
Leona, remember the Melissa Sharkey? Babsa and Shai Ben Segav Shaham Ben Carmela ואוריאנה זוהר בת כרמלה ויפית עם רבעם בת כרמלה מגדלתם all and may she has a good trip to Israel and enjoy life in Israel.
Rezel bat Chaika.
Esther Bamaka, Huvaracham, Bamaka Senate in Florence, Taiwo Bad Rezo, Uri Shabtai Ben Miriam, Matan David Ben Minha, and Sarah Gittel Bat Tova. We had Kol HaCholim B'Kila Kodosha Hazod, HaKodesh Baruch Hu, Yemalei Rechamim Alehem, L'Achizakam B'Rapatam, V'Yishlach Lehem Herav Rufot Shema Min HaShamayim Rufot HaNefesh Rudo Guf, B'Toch Shar Cholei Yisrael V'Yechazek Et Yidei Oskim B'Torchehem, Hashta B'Galav Yizman Kariv, V'Nomar
Amen. Oy Rabbana Shalom. Allah Kranken Suhaban Refuah Shlema.
Continue on page 895, verse 8.
Baruch and Amarach Olam Ba'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher ba'al charbanu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torah. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayomer Alehem Linu Fo Halayla V'Hashivoti Etchem Davar Kasher Yidaber Adonai Elai Vayeshvu Sarei Moav Im Bilam Vayavo Elohim El Bilam Vayomer Mi Hanashima Ela Imach Vayomer Bilam El Elohim Balak Ben Sipor Melech Moav Shalach Elai Hine Ha'am Yehayotze Mimitzrayim Vayichas Et Eina Aretz Yata Lecha Kovali Oti Oto Ulai Uchal Lehilachem Bo Lehilachem Bo V'Gerashtiv Vayomer Elohim El Bilam Lo Telech Mahem Lo Ta'or Et Am Ki Varuchu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Yamod, Magbia, Yamod, Rolelet. He's the name.
Torah asher Moshe
Livnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Eitz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba v'tomchei ameh Eitz Chaim hi lamachazikim v'tomchei ameh derachei darchei noam v'chol netivotei shalom derachei darchei noam v'chol netivotei shalom yadanai hoemdai nanai yadanai nanai ay yadai yavavo yadanai nanai yadai dai 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 ay. Anyone present or on Zoom was a yort site? Needs to say Amale? BJ? What's his name?
Shmulia Sacher.
Ben Mayer. We'll do an Amale for BJ's father. Hail Male Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utohorim, Kezoar Haraki Amazhirim, Lenishmat Shmuel Yisachar ben Meir HaKohen Shalach Leolamo, Began Eden Tehei Menuchato, Ana Ba'al Harachamim, Hastireu Beseter Knafecha Liolamim, Utzror Betzrachem Bet Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'shalom HaMishkavo, V'nomar Amen. BJ, is there a memory of your father you want to share?
I just miss him a lot. I remember his gentle heart and his gentle hands, and I miss them. He's gone way too soon.
7 years? 8 years?
This will be 9.
9 years.
67.
He's a chro, BJ. He's a chro baruch. May his memory be a great blessing to you and your children. Anyone else who has your take this week? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. So we'll go back to putting the Torah away. In the Lev Shalem, it's on page 221.
Yeah, hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Kiniska Shemo Levado, Kernemo, Dilaxita, It's time came Maxim Bab, Zamchecha Meusha, Drecha Tachenoam, Vechonetivote Shalom, Hashivenu Anailecha Venashuva, Hadesh Yamenu Kekedem. יתגדל ויתגדל שמי רבה, ועמדי ברכותי והמליך ברכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון, ובחייך בישראל, בהגלה בזמן קריב עמו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעולמי עולמי. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתמם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קודשה בריחו. לעילם ינגו ברכתה ושירתה, תושבתה ונחמתה תעמוד בעולמה, ועמו אמן.
Petition begins 223, Kedusha 225.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzhak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Hayal HaGadol HaGibor VaNorah El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Yaakov V'Zoher Chastei Avot U'Mevi Goel Livnei B'neihem L'man Shema B'Ava Melech Ozer V'Kedem Moshiach Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham V'Ketzara, Ata Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechem Itavav L'Oshia, Morid Atal, Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechem Etim B'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Ofer Cholim V'Matir Asurim, Mekayem Ato L'Shenei Avar, Mirama Rabag U'Verod, U'Mido Melach, Melech Me'emidum Chaim Atzmiach Yeshua, V'Ne'eman Atal Chayov Beitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayei HaMeitim. לקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שבחתי שמך בשמי מרום, וככתוב היד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר. קדוש, 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 הנצור מלוך על הארץ כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, דברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, לנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו, מפינו לאמור של עולם ועד, כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. אתה אחד בשמך אחד, מכם חסר גוי אחד בארץ, תפארת גדולה. ועטר ישועה, יום מנוחה, קדושה לעמך נתת, אברהם יגל, יצחק ירנן, יעקב ובניו ינוחו בו, מנוחת אהבה ונדבה, מנוחת אמת ואמונה, מנוחת שלום ושלווה והשקט בבטח, מנוחת שלמה שאתה רוצה בה, יכירו בניך, וידעו כי מאיתך כי מנוחתם, ועל מנוחתם יקדישו את שמך. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, הצב מנוחתנו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סרבנו מטובך, ושמחנו בישועתך, ותאר ליבנו לעבדך באמת. והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו, באהבה ורצון שבת קודשך, וינוחו בה ישראל מקדשי שמך. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת. רצה אדוני אלוהינו וחסו תפילתם, והשבת אדוני לדביר ביתך, ותפילתם באהבה תרובה ברצון, ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך, ותחזינה עינינו, ושובך לציון ברחמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, המחזיר שכינתו לציון, מודים אנחנו לך. מעולם קיווינו לך, ועל כולם יתברך ויונם שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד, וכל עם יודחו הסלע ויעלו את שמך באמת, האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני, התושבך לכהן להודות. שלום רב על ישראל עמך, ועל כל יושבי תבל תשים לעולם, כי אתה הוא מלך, אדון לכל השלום, וטוב בעיניך. לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום. צדקתך צדק לעולם, ותורתך אמת, וצדקתך אלוהים, עד מרום אשר עשית גדולות. אלוהים יכבוך, צדקתך בהרי אל, משפטך תהום רבה. אדם ובהמה תושיע אדוני. יתגדל ויגדש שמרבה, ועמד דברי קירותי והמליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון וחייתך בישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב עמו, אמן. יהי שמר ברוך לעולם המאיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתברך ויתמם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמר קדושה וכולי. אמן כה ברכתה ושירתה, תושבתה ונחמתה דמן בעלמה ועמו, אמן. תתקבל צלת וברכון תכו ישראל, קדם ורשמיה ועמו, אמן. יהי שלום רב מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועמו, אמן. עושה שלום עממיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמו אמן. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא ירנה אחד ושמו אחד יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Go get some food for Sudashli Sheet. If you're on Zoom, we're just going to take a few minutes for people to get some food for Sudashli Sheet, and then we'll do the teaching. The text sheet was in the Shabbat email. I'll also be, going through every source out loud as well. So give us about 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Shkaya.
I've never learned how to properly fold Thomas.
There's no one way.
Yeah, I just get it in there and it works.
I try as much as possible to follow the original fold, but it's not like it's
But once it's folded, then you're there. That's really my job to do. Wait, you have anything to get by?
Doing good. How about you?
How's the mushroom kingdom?
How's what?
We decided not to go forward with doing the Hartman teaching.
We might go back to it. We haven't made a decision about it, and so while we're making
Didn't recognize those. Bishop going to be requested.
This is in Washington. Okay.
We got a strong committee. Fight as long as they want to fight, and the company will be losing substantial amounts of money. Plus not money. How about you?
You know, the leases were open and you still have to go get the food and bring it in and you just take it.
Somewhat. It's that they don't have sessions.
How are you? AJ Beach.
There are no
There are a few, but it's.
Oh, that is very challenging.
And there weren't going to be days off offhand.
Oh, not giving you mumchi, that's a major change. If you've got a
They don't want people to go in camp.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But if the man has a job, very.
5 days off, you leave at 6 in the morning, back to work.
I think she's coming.
Malcolm is up in Canada. They give him, at least they give him his he is working especially with children. And one of his friends is a for this weekend. So his day off on the 4th of July, he was able to go to his son's parents have a cabin right on the lake. He got away and got to
Thank you.
which is exactly like me.
I went to see that. You know, at the Skirt Ball, they're having that exhibit on delicatessens, the history of delicatessens.
Have you seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Is it good?
It brings back memories of, you know, the foods we grew up with. You know, to outsiders, you mentioned something like tongue, and they're horrified at it, you know, but do you remember eating tongue?
A little before my time. Tongue?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
delicious.
yes,
Oh, it's
with the
delicious.
raisin sauce. Raisin sauce.
Oh, it's delicious. It's delicious, really. I loved it. I loved it. They still got delicatessens in New York where you can buy it.
Well, oh my God, I think you might miss that. Surely.
We'll buy something vegan.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know.
Bagels are probably.
No, I was saying I saw that exhibit at the Skirt Ball on delicatessens in America.
Your shoes are untied, just so you know.
Really very interesting.
What? Fine and being reformed.
Come that way.
What?
No one wants to eat that much red meat, fat, and things like that anymore. So delicatessen reform what's going forward. They have some delicatessens, but how the major institution, a lot of them, Andrews is one of the last, not so that. Everyone wants to eat goodness anymore.
Western kosher has it.
Excuse me?
Western kosher has it.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
What do they have?
Ribness.
Ribs.
With the ribbons.
Different way.
I didn't really do vegan ribbon last
Because my
time.
parents stayed at the store. I didn't hear you, I'm sorry. I know, you went a
I
different
had
way there.
some vegan ribbon last time.
Vegan, so you going vegan?
You know what? I figured out the way that Michael did it.
Yeah,
He
there's
goes,
There's a great place if
Trader
you're
Joe's vegan ice cream
vegetarian.
sandwiches are really good.
Follow your heart.
That's where it was. Yeah.
Well, that's not, oh, you went down, you got it,
Miracle
you got
Park.
it vegan there. They have, their Reuben sandwich is terrific. I thought it really had, yeah, it is, their place is vegan. It's on Sherman Way, about 1 block east of the Bangor Camp. It is, they have the best selection of food. And their vegetarian chili is incredible.
Where's that?
It's in the valley. It's on Sherman Way, 1 block east of the Bangor Camp. Follow your heart. It's been there since the 70s.
All right, let's get going, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. You can think of Torah study and any kind of study as the shape of an hourglass. Sometimes the shape is, you start with a wide opening to make a very, very narrow and almost picayune point, and sometimes you go through the narrowest of openings and hopefully it opens up into something larger. We're going to do the latter. I imagine it's no surprise to everyone when I'm teaching anything, particularly Parsha, I have no idea what I'm going to teach until I start studying. It's not like, very rarely do I say, I need to teach this topic, I need to find it in the Parsha. Sometimes I do that with a sermon. But I'm teaching, it's kind of good old-fashioned, studying the Parsha, see what speaks to me. So I began to study Parshat Balak and one root, 1, 2, or 3 letter root stood out to me, depending on how you understand the grammar. And as I poked around, it remained very, very small until all of a sudden the idea that seemed to be revealing itself to me became rather big, and hopefully you'll feel the same way. So if you're studying from home, first of all, the source sheet was in the Shabbat email, but we're going to start with the 22nd chapter of Bamidbar. It's really the opening line of Parshat Balak. So it's page 894 in the Eitz Chaim, but if you have the sheet, you don't need the Eitz Chaim at all. Actually, have an Eitz Chaim near you because there's one verse I forgot to put in the source sheet that we might look at. Okay, so we know the story that's about to unfold. Balak is the king of Moab. Moab, present-day Jordan, crossed the Jordan River. Israelites are actually, because they're going kind of around counterclockwise from Egypt. They have to pass through the area. And this guy we've never met before, Balak, the son of the bird. Anyone? Ben Sipor. Thank you. I'll be here all week. Saw that all that Israel had done to the Amorites, meaning saw that this was a traveling force that was able to wreak havoc on people in their way. And now we have the verse we're going to focus on. Vayagor Moab. By the way, if you're in my Rashi class, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. Translations are impossible. Once we translate this verse, the study's over. Like, there's no reason to study it. So I'm going to try to translate it without translating it, right? Moab was Gur, something like that. It does not mean here to live like a ger, like someone who lives somewhere. It has something to do with concern. It's translated by the JPS as alarmed. I don't love that translation. But he was afraid, mipnei ha'am, in the presence of the people. Ma'od, very. Why? Ki ravhu, because they were great. What does that remind us of instantly? Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh was afraid of us because we were getting bigger and concerned that vayatzmu bim'od ma'od, they're getting very, very stronger. And he was concerned specifically they were going to rise up against him and conquer him. Okay. And now our verse, our phrase. Vayakotz Moav. Yaakov was not only Gar, he was Katz, right? Whatever Yakotz means, it seems to be similar to Vayagor because it's almost like there's two halves of the sentence with them both saying a version of the same thing, right? And if you look at the translation, it tells you that these verbs are siblings or cousins. He was alarmed and he dreaded. He was nervous and he was afraid. He was concerned and he was upset, right? These are all shades of one another. The question is, what root does Vayakotz come from, such that we might translate it as he was afraid of or had fear of the people of Israel. Anyone think of a Hebrew root that you know? Kuf tzadi or kuf yud tzadi or kuf vav tzadi? Kayetz? Okay, kayetz means what? Summer. Anyone know why kayetz means summer? We don't know for sure. Our guess as to why kayetz means summer is because it's related to the word kates, meaning an end, like an end of the season where things might grow, right? Summer in Israel, where things do not grow. That's just a guess. Some words we just have no idea their origin. So one of the roots of that kotes, vayakotz, mean is an ending. How to plug that in here, I'm not sure. Moab was ended. Moab was nervous about its end. Moab dreaded its own end because of the Israelites. Not sure. But you have a basic sense of what's going on. Moab is not happy, and Balak, its king. Interesting. Moab these are singular verbs referring to an entire people. So it's not that Balak himself was Yagar or Yakatz, but as if the entirety of the nation was both nervous and dreading it. Okay. Look at what Rashi says. Rashi's very, very terse here, although there are versions of Rashi that add a few lines, and you'll actually see that on the English side of the text sheet. Katsu b'chayehem. Katsu b'chayehem. They were ending of their lives. They were despising of their lives on its own, unless you know Torah by heart. It's hard to know how Rashi's two-word explanation is resolving the question of what Vayakotz Moab is. But if you look at the English, you'll see that some versions of Rashi actually play it out a little bit and say, he is referring to another place in Torah where the root kates, ending, something like that, and chai, life, come together. What is that verse, look at the next source. If you're from home, you don't have the source sheet, you can open up to Genesis 27:46, Parshat Vayetze, Parshat Toldo. Vatomer Rivka el Yitzchak. Rivka said to Isaac, her husband, Katzti b'chayai. Also very hard to translate there. Something like, I've had enough of my life. I would like my life to end. This is almost the Torah's way of describing suicidal depression, right? Katzti b'chayai. If my life were to come to an end, I'm trying to do it in English that makes sense of the word kates, meaning ending, it would be okay. Why is she so upset? Mipnei bnot Chet, because of the daughters of Chet, the Hittite women, whom her children were hanging around with a little too closely. Im lokeach Yaakov isha mibnot Chet. If, God forbid, Jacob takes a wife from those women, ka'ela, like them, mibnot haaretz, from the people of this, the daughters of this land, lama li chaim. Why is there life to me? That, if there's anything more focused on self-abnegation than that, I don't know. Why should I have life? So if she's saying, why should I have life, meaning I'm so sad at the prospect of Jacob marrying one of these women, I'm willing to say, katzti b'chayai, almost as if may my life come to an end. If you read that back into Vayikatz Moav, Rashi's saying that when Moab said that they were kates, it was as if they're saying they're so afraid they'd rather die than deal with the awful battles about to come, as if Israel was some terrible monster. Far be it from me to contradict Rashi, but in context, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that this nation with a king would be, it makes sense that they'd be nervous that the people were coming through. It wouldn't make sense that they were so terrified at the torture that was to come upon them if Israelite came through that they'd rather die now. Right? We can kind of understand Rivka's individual suicidal ideation, but the notion of an entire nation saying, we're terrified of Israel, all these terrible things they've done, kill us now. It seems to be extreme, but that's the way that Rashi reads it. There's another verse that also relates to this root. This is the 20th chapter of Leviticus Vayikra, if you're studying from home and you don't have the sheet. Velo telchu bechukot hagoy. God is saying, don't follow the statutes of the other nations. Which nation? Asher ani mishaleach minipnechem, that I'm going to kind of cast away from in front of you. Ki et kol eila asu, because they did all these terrible things. Va'akutzbam. Also, very hard to translate. Hard to translate here is having to do with end, unless what God is saying is that I ended them, but the form of the verb is not causative, that he did something, that God did something to them, but rather than God is experiencing a kutz. It doesn't make sense for God to say, I wish I didn't exist. God would never say that. So maybe here it has to do with an abhorrence. I can't stand those nations. Don't go after those ways. If that's what our verse means, then going back into Vayakotz Moav, it's not that they were afraid and they would be willing to surrender their lives before a battle. They just hated Israel. They heard what Israel had done to the Amorites and yich, blech, I had nothing to do with them. But if that's the case, it doesn't really explain Balak's reaction to them. But it's possible, because we still don't know exactly what the word means. Look at Ibn Ezra, Spanish commentator a couple hundred years after Rashi. He says something which I'll admit to you, I don't fully understand the grammar of it. He says, kamo hafuch. The verb vayakatz is similar to if you switched around the letters. And he gives us a proof text, kamo, a verse from Isaiah, na'aleh biYehuda unikitzena. We'll go up to Judah, it's translated here, and we will vex it. We will upset it. I think what Ibn Ezra is saying is that whether it's Yud Kuf Tzadi as in Vayakotz, or Kuf Yud Tzadi as in Nikitzana, it means the same thing. The only problem with this, and this is a strange thing for Ibn Ezra to make a mistake on, is that he probably knows that the verb Vayakotz, the Yud of Vayakotz, is not part of the root. It's part of the structure of the word. So why he's making a proof text here, not sure. But if we go on the meaning, it has to do with vexing, to upset. So if you're paying attention, we have three possibilities. Moab wanted their lives to be over. That's the use of kates. I don't even want to battle them. I'd rather just commit national suicide. That's number one. Number two, through the verse in Leviticus, Moab felt disgust towards Israel. Not that they were terrified, they're just disgust. Yuck, blech, I don't want them going through my territory. Or through Ibn Ezra, Moab was vexed, was upset. It's a slightly different meaning than the other two. Those are the three that are hanging out so far. Look at Sforno, Italian commentator, 15th century. Vayakots Moab. Hamon Moab katsu b'chayehem. The multitude of Moab, meaning the entire nation, Hamon means the whole group of them, katsu b'chayehem, also thought their lives were worthy of being ended, mipnei b'nei Israel, because of the Israelites, hasholalim otam, who were, they feared, about to plunder them, about to come take advantage of them. That's, Sforno is closer to Rashi than the other ones that are present. Okay, those are the most standard ways of understanding this verse, right? Moab was terrified. Moab thought Israelites disgusting. Moab was vexed by the whole situation, and that's why Balak had to hire Bilam to go curse them. Right now, I'm focused less on the storyline and more on what the verse mean. And I should have said this at the beginning: what is the precursor to rational people taking irrational action? Because I think this parsha is addressing that. If we think of it not only in terms of what happened to the Israelites, but why the Torah is including it. You have a nation called Moab, and out of nowhere, they feel the need to curse an entire people and get rid of them. What causes an individual or a nation to start acting irrationally, and have irrationality overcome rationality? Yeah. Okay, so fear is one of them, and so fear is one of the things that we have brought out here in terms of Vayakots. But I would ask on that, what causes the fear, such that's like once fear is present, it's hard not to act irrationally. But what is in the system that might be actually engendering that fear? Look at the next source. This is Bamidbar Rabbah. This is the classic rabbinic midrash, Agadic storyline midrash on the book of Numbers from Midbar. V'hayu elu ro'in et artzam. This is referring to the Moabites. They saw their nation, biyad Yisrael. This midrash is imagining that the Moabites sort of had a bit of a prophecy, a bit of a foreshadowing. They had a kind of a mutual hallucination. All of a sudden, they saw Israel at their border, and they imagined that Israel had already conquered them. V'hayu omrim, and they would say to one another in their nervousness, Lo amar lehem hakadosh baruch hu, did not the Holy One say to them, quote, Ki lo etein lecha me artso Yerusha? I got to break this down. First of all, this is a wonderful midrashic imagination. Not only does the midrash imagine that the Moabites knows the Torah by heart, such that they are quoting to themselves what God said to Israel, but this phrase of Ein mukdamu muchar b'Torah, there's no chronology in the Torah. The Moabites are quoting a verse from Deuteronomy which hasn't happened yet. But let that game happen. I didn't bring that verse, so open up to chapter 2 of Deuteronomy, verse 9. This is the opening of Harshat, second chapter of the book of and the parsha of Devarim. In the Eitz Chaim, it's 991. Oh, I forgot to mention the most famous kates, meaning end. And I forgot to put that in the source sheet also. When God tells Noach that he's going to destroy the earth, kates kol basar balafanai, that an ending of all life and flesh is going to come to the world. So in that situation, katz kates means an ending without question. What's going on here? Moshe is rehashing the Israelites' experience through the desert. Inside the Midrash, the Moabites are quoting the rehashing that Moshe hasn't yet given, so it's a time machine. Start reading from verse 8. Moshe is saying, we passed out of the land of our brethren, the children of Esav. Interesting that they're referred to as brethren here. I mean, they are, but almost as a sympathetic thing. Hayoshvim b'Seir, who were dwelling in the area of Seir, Miderach Arava, in the pathway coming up from, you want to imagine it like north of Eilat, Me'elat u'me'etzion Gaver, from that town of Eilat up into that area. Vanefen v'na'avor. We turned and we passed. Derech midbar Moab. We have passed by the wilderness of Moab. So Moshe in this verse is reminiscing about what we're experiencing real time in Parshat Balak. Vayomer Adonai Eli. God said to me, Al tatsar at Moab. Don't trouble the Moabites. Very interesting verse that the Moabites are quoting, right? Just to remember what's going on here. In the Midrash, the Moabites are saying, we know what God said, except that it's a will say. We know what God will say. God is going to tell the Israelites not to bother us. We were supposed to be free of the Israelites. But al titgar bam, God says, don't disturb them. Milchama with a war. I'm not going to give you any of their land, Yerusha, as an inheritance. Kilivnei Lot, it belongs to the children of Lot. Natati to our Yerusha. That area belongs to them. In the Midrash, the Moabites are going crazy because they know that the Israelites are not supposed to be taking over this land. God is not promising them, but they see in their hallucinations the Israelites massing on the border, and it's as if they've already conquered, and therefore all of reality is thrown out of whack. They're terrified, and they're terrified in an irrational way. They say, back in our source, the Midrash, didn't God promise that he's not going to give our land to them? Harei artseinu lifnehem, but they're right there. They're on the border. God's promise maybe doesn't mean anything. Maybe we're not safe from the Israelites. A totally irrational fear. Lechach hayu midya'arin. Therefore they were afraid. And now we have our verse, and now we have my favorite reading of the root. Vayakotz Moab. Moab was katzed. Shehayu ro'in et atzman. They saw themselves kikotzin bifnehem. Not katz verb ending, but katz coats noun. What's a coats? A thorn. It's a very interesting 2,000-year-old psychology here. We're nervous that we are not going to be able to appease this nation coming through us. We're nervous that we're going to be thorns in their side. We're nervous that they're going to see us as just dispensable. What do you do with a thorn? You pull it out and you stomp on it. They had a sense of themselves as being small and irrelevant and unneeded by this grand nation coming through the desert. And as a result of that, they went into an irrational fear, and that irrational fear pushed them to attempt, unsuccessfully, because God intervenes, right? God's managed the whole thing, to curse the Israelites into oblivion. So one side's fear that the other is not going to need them and dispose of them invites that side to want to do the annihilation of the direction, mutual destruction. If you've lived through the Cold War, you ever spent a night in your room wondering which premier or president was going to wake up and determine that, wait a second, if they really think that we are just thorns to be dispensed with, then maybe we should think of them as thorns first and dispense with them first. And that's, war games, Matthew Broderick, and the end of humanity, right? Which probably, remember what was the doomsday thing? Like there's the doomsday clock. At one point we were at like 11:45 p.m. or something like that, because of all of the ways in which individuals and nations were certain that the other one was about to annihilate us because they thought that we were just kotzim. The Hamek Davar, the last source, the Netziv. Please, yeah.
So in the two verses, it seems to me we have a common word, Yagar and Al-Kitgar. They're translated somewhat differently, but I think there's a way of understanding them in the same way.
Oh, the verse from Deuteronomy?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Our verse says V'yagar Moab.
Yes. Same root. Same root as Al Tidgar Bam.
Right. And Moses is saying God told him, don't Yagar them.
Right. And yet they got Yagard.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So that's also part of this like negative fantasy where the Moabites are saying God told Moshe to not allow us to be Yagard in front of them, but we're terrified anyway.
Well, it feeds into what you were saying. Take the word, take the translation in Balak. It says they were alarmed. So if you put alarm there, then God's telling them, of Don't alarm them
Yeah.
because they might respond.
Correct. Don't give them any reason to think that you think so small of them, such that they will have an irrational fear and think the exact same way to you and try to curse you into oblivion. Right? It's almost as if the whole parsha didn't need to happen because God wouldn't have to use a mercenary prophet like Bilam and get the donkey to talk to stop the cursing if there hadn't been the initiative by the king Balak to curse the Israelites in the first place. And why did that happen? According to the Midrash and according to the source we're going to read in a second, the Israelites had something to do with it. This was an irrational fear by Balak, but that was somehow brought up because the Israelites were acting in such a way that made Moab think, we are nothing to them, we're thorns. What do you do with a thorn? You remove it.
They didn't announce that they were going to pass peacefully, just like in adversaries tell each other that they're going to conduct war games.
Right.
Don't be alarmed.
Right.
I'm going to do these war games.
Right.
Don't be alarmed. We're passing through.
Right. And already, if you have it in your head, take it from nation to person, right? Because nation, there's artillery and weaponry and mass bloodshed. Person to person, right? What does it mean to hold yourself in such a way so that the other person will never think that you think of them merely as a coats, as a thorn that if it's near you, it's causing you pain, you might as well just discard it. Because that's how relationships or worlds end. Look at the Netziv, we'll end with this. This is Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, his commentary on the Torah called the Ha'amek Davar, Deepening the Issue. And it's from him that I got this read, and then I went back and found the Midrash that you had before. Vayakotz Moav mipnei bnei Israel. It's the same quote. Hein hema chashuvei ugdolei Yisrael. Saying something interesting here. That Moab had this reaction to which Israelites? The most important and the greatest of the Israelites. They weren't responding to like just the person on the street, but they had this sense in their mind about how the leaders of Israel felt about them. Shalo yaru mehem shiasu ra'ah. They weren't afraid that those Israelites were going to do something bad to them. Ki ein derech adam gadol b'chach. A dignitary, a dignified person is not going to directly act evil towards you, according to this read. Aval hitbonanu bigdulatam. But Moab looked closely. Excuse me. But Moab hitbonanu, from the word tivuna, they investigated. They looked closely. They understood deeply. Bigdulatam, in the greatness of these Israelite dignitaries. V'hayu nechshavim ba'atzmam kakotzim. The way that Netziv is reading it, it's not that Moab was concerned that the Israelites were Russia invading Ukraine ruthlessly and killing wantonly, but rather that in the presence of Israelites and the great ones, they thought of themselves as nothing. Does that remind anyone of anything? Of any verse in the Torah? The spies. Say more, Alan. Yeah.
The notion of that we are nothing before they are Gadolim and these are giants, and we are nothing in their eyes. We are
grasshoppers, right? So the spies a couple of parshas ago, their mania is that they saw the residents of Canaan and saw them as giants. And when you think you're in the presence of a giant, the bigger they get in your imagination, the smaller you get. Have you ever had that experience where you're in the presence of someone's greatness or expertise or ability, and you almost feel yourself getting smaller and smaller? They aren't doing anything to you, but your sense of self can sometimes reduce in the presence of someone else's greatness, particularly if they're great in something that you aspire to be great in. Right? It can happen, on the basketball court, right? It can happen, when you're cycling and someone, is going on ahead of you because their muscles are stronger than you.
I think an easier perception is jealousy.
Uh-huh.
I'm reading the Guns of August, and they went through the case of World War I, how it started. The Germans just feeling jealous of different things that were occurring in the world.
Yeah.
A lot of the
Right.
fears.
So jealousy would be the second level, the way the Netziv is reading it, that this begins with your sense of feeling small compared to someone else. Let's finish reading it. Shahayu nechshabim ba'atzmam kekotzim. They thought of themselves as thorns, so that we'd read the phrase Vayakotz Moab. Moab thorned themselves. They looked in the mirror and they saw nothing. Shera'u otam mithalchim lamala mahalichot b'nei adam. They saw these Israelites holding themselves in an upper, grandiose way, more than normal people do. What the Netziv does there is not a small thing. He's blaming this entire episode on whom? The Netziv here in this last line is blaming all of Parshat Balak on whom? No. Whom, but who's responsible? The great haughty Israelites who walked in with their fine robes and their sense that they're in the Sanhedrin already, and they have a direct relationship with Moses, and they have a direct relationship with God, and in their carrying of themselves with Gedulah, the reaction of the Moabites was not, oh, we're in the presence of good and fine people, we're okay. They were, we're in the presence of people who are on a different level than us. We must be kotzim, we must be thorns. We're about to be eliminated. Let's eliminate them. I think I have no idea if this is the right reading of the Parsha, but I think but anytime you read a comment like this, you're observing a sage essentially give a sermon through, a particular small hole in the Parsha. And the sermon here that I imagine the Netziv giving is, when you carry yourself with a certain greatness, and there's nothing wrong with being dignified, there's nothing wrong with having a certain kavod and honor, you run the risk every single time of having a potential Moab in your midst, who in the presence of your Gedulah does not get raised up, but gets brought down. Sometimes you're not even aware of it. And it's not even all your fault. Sometimes it's in the mind of that person. But to not be sensitive to it risks their responding to their own smallness in your presence by acting out against you, by trying to curse you, by trying to eliminate you. Person to person, group to group, party to party, in a country, nation to nation. What I liked about this is, first of all, it goes against the pshat, right? Because very few people read Vayakotz having to do with anything other than the three initial words we had, like ending and abhorrence and fear. And because he's trying to get at why this odd story, which spends most of the Parsha dealing with someone outside of the Israelite camp, is present. And I think he's reading it as a cautionary tale. Right? We might be all the time, B'nai Israel, walking through other people's territory, other people's spaces. And how are we holding ourselves? And how are we making other people feel in our presence? And what might that make them do in response? And getting to us before we even are aware of it. So I was appreciative of the Hamek Davar for taking this tiny little case and opening it up into a really, I think, grand discussion about what our relationship is with other people, even especially as we are in a place of pride and self-love. Comments or reactions?
Yeah, I'm one of these people that is very, very obsessed and very sad that American society is so violent. Really, we're one of the most, we may be the most violent country in the world. Really, we're incredibly violent. And I thought maybe you were going to tie things in, but I think the high grade of violence in America just goes beyond this,
Yes, I wasn't trying to get into grand themes that are problematic in American culture right now, although that's worthy of discussing. But if look at try to look at your next few interactions with another person through this prism and see if as a result of it, you hold yourself slightly differently. If you hold your sense of self in the presence of someone else who might not feel as good about themselves as you feel about you, slightly differently, are you inviting them into a relationship rather than lording over them, even in a gentle way that might lead them to feel a certain way about themselves? And once they feel that way about themselves, inevitably they're going to feel something very different towards you. Deborah?
I think it's hard for the Israelites because they're literally on a mission from God. Right?
Yeah.
They have this whole organization of how the camp is. They have the items that they're supposed to be carrying a certain way, and they're supposed to feel like we're on this grand mission and
Yeah.
we're going to our land where it's even going to get better. And so it's a very fine line to walk between walking like that, like we're
Yes.
all on a quest, right?
Yes.
And not making other people feel
Correct.
strange.
What Deborah's saying is that it's a fine line, because if we take this scene out of it, what's wrong with Israelites marching through the desert in their finery, each tribe, arrayed the way they were supposed to, proud of carrying the Mishkan? What's wrong with that, right? I think it is a fine line. If you want to connect it to something more modern, right? I think and we're all guilty of this, right? So I'm going to say a general comment, but we all play into it. Every time we Facebookize or Instagramize our perfect moment, our perfect vacation, our perfect children, our kids' perfect graduation, on some level, what's wrong with sharing with the world and the people who we're in relationship with that we're doing okay? The problem might be for the people who are not doing okay, that could be a taunt, not an intentional taunt. It could be a tease, and it could be sending them into a spiral that leads to negative outcomes. So it's a fine line. There's no one. Most of the times, as you know, when I teach a tradition, I rarely end up with a straight conclusion. It's a tension. It's a tension between. The tension goes back to something in the Siddur. We'll end with this. Open up the Siddur to if you're in the Lev Shalem in Birkot HaShachar. No, in the Lev Shalem, it's later on. Hold on. So open up your Siddurim to page. Yeah. Okay, 105. This is exactly the tension you were talking about, Deborah. In the very, very early part of Birkot HaShachar, so on daily minyan, we get to this at 7:30 and a half, and Shabbat morning we get at 9:16. We're talking about our humility in the middle of the page. Ma nachnu, what are we after all? Ma chayinu, what's our life worth? Ma chasteinu, what's our grace? Ma tzidkenu, what's our merit and our righteousness? Ma yishenu, in what way do we actually even deserve deliverance? We are nothing. Ki chol masenu tohu, all of the things that we do is as if they are void. V'mei chayinu hevel lefanecha, we are nothing compared to you, God. We are void and vapid. Umotar hadam bin habehema ayin, and the advantage that a human being has over an animal is nothing. Ki hakol havim, right? So we're nothing, right? We hold ourselves with a sense of appropriate smallness. Aval, but God, anachnu amcha, but we're your people. B'nei vitecha, the children of your covenant. B'nei Avraham, we're the children of Avraham. We get to puff ourselves up. We get to walk through the world with a sense of pride and standing up tall, standing up straight. We get to walk through the desert and passing by Moab and say, hey, we're Israel, we're on a mission. So somehow we have to find a way to both feel good enough about ourselves as individuals and as a nation that we're able to benefit from the pride that we have accrued, and do it in such a way that people don't feel like thorns in our presence. And I think that's the ongoing challenge of the Jew, perhaps of every human being. We'll end there. Kaddish to Rabbanan. Joey, you're my page caller. 38 in the Lev Shalem, and then we'll bench, and then we'll go to Mariv. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah v'almad yivrach hirutei v'amlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman karim v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam le'amel maya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yit hadar, v'yit alev, v'yit halal, shemei kedusha brichu. Le'ila min kol berachata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael, v'al Rabbanan, v'al Tamidehon, v'al kol Tamidei Tamidehon, v'al kol man daskin v'oraita, di v'atra hadein, v'di b'chol atar v'atar, Yehei lahon l'chon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin zona revicha u'forkana min kodam avahon divishmaya v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav u'barachamav yaseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Joey, do you want to lead benching quickly?
I got bread.
Do you have bread? Anyone who have bread who wants to lead benching? Anyone have bread? Larry? Shuv Adonai et Shivat Zionayinu kechol mimaz yemal Tzchopinu shoneinu rina Az yomru v'hagoy Hindil Adonai lazodim ele Hindil Adonai lazodim anu Hainu semechim Shuv Adonai et Shiviteinu kafikim b'negeh Hazorim bedim berina yekzoru Halo yelelu bachon osei meshech hazara Bo yavo berina no sei alumota Yishem Rabarach me'atavi adolam Baruch Eloheinu shalchan mishalov tuvo chayinu Amen. Ya'aseh Shalom Rahu, Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru. פותח את ידיך ומשפיע לך חרצה. ברוך הגבר.
אשר תקפנו, והירדון מתחו, נער הייתי גם זקנתי, לא הייתי שק וזהב, וזרעו מבקש לכם, וזרעו מבקש לכם.
אדוני עוז לי עמו יבטן, אדוני ברך את עמו באשר. We rise from Mariv 265 in the Lev Shalem.
281 or 200 in the other Sidurim.
281 and 200 in the other Sidurim. Sorry, 264, my bad. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והרבה להשיבה פה בדרכו חמתו. אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ויום קוראנו. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם, וברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני המרי ברבים. כי הם חיינו באורך ימינו והם נגע יומם ולילה ויעבדך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת ואמונה כזאת וקיים עלינו כי הוא אדוני ואלוהינו ואנחנו ישראל הפודם והמלכים המג'יחנו אבמות אויבינו ויגרם קרנינו על כל שונאי האסור ונזעקנו. ומלכותו רצון קיבלו עליהם משה בני שלחנו שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך בעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נוראתי להודות אלה מלכותך ראו בניך בוקי הים לפני משה זה ליהנו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום יטב יד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל יד ברוך אדוני לעולם אמן ואמן ברוך להם בציון שוכן שלום. כי המלכות שלך היא לעולם יתים לך בכבוד, כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה ברוך אתה, אדוני המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו. יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה, ימדי רחותי ומליך מלכותי בחייכונה וימיכון אוכל לכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב, וימרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ומלאה יברך, וישתבח ויתפאר שמם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמיני קדושה בריחו. יעלה מכל בכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמרן בעלמה וימרו אמן. Chatzi Kaddish 279. יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה, למען דברי חיותי ואמליך מלכותי בחיי אחרונה וימי אחרונה וחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב במהרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם למעלה יברך וישתבח ויתפאר שמה ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שכינה קדושה בריחו לעולם יכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא במהרו אמן. והנה אדוני אלוהינו עלינו מעשה ידינו כהן עלינו מעשה ידינו כהננו יושב בסתר עליון בצל שדי יתלונן אומר לאדוני מחסים מסעודתי לא יבטח בו כי הוא יצא כי אתה במחסי עליון שמת לו לחלות הכפיים ישאונך פן תיקוף באבן רגליך על שחלות יקראני בעיניהו עמו אנוכי בצר החצר ויכבדהו אורחים ימשביעהו בערי בשועתי אורחים ימשביעהו בערי בשועתי. Lev Shalem back to 216 second paragraph. ואתה קדוש יושב תהילות ישראל בקרזל זה ויאמר קדוש 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 מקבלים די מדי בימים כביש ותישאני רוח ואשמע אחרי כל רעש גדול ברוך אדוני ממקומו וגלני רוח השמית בקרי קהל ישג לשבח אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני מלכותי כאין לעולם לעולם. תיתן אמת ליעקב חסד לאברהם. ברוך אלוהינו שבראנו לכבודו והגענו מהטוב נתן לנו תורת אמת בחיי עולם נתן בתוכנו ונפתח לבנו תורת הבשרים. למען יזמרך כבוד ולא ידום אדוני אלוהי לעולם עבדיך וברוך וישרתך באדוני ויענם יתברכו באדוני עד יד כי ביאה אדוני צור עולמים ויבטחו בך ידי שמך כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה ויאדיר יקדש יקדש שמי רבה למען דברך ודבר מלך וחותי בחיי אחרונה וימי אחרונה וחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם למעלה יברך וישתבח ויתפאר שמה וינשא ותודה ותעלה ותהלל שכינה קדושה בריחו לעולם יכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. תקבל צאתנו ואתנו דכל בית ישראל קדם הוני ושמיא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיא וחיים עלינו וכל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל במהרו אמן. עלינו 281. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל. אנחנו קוראים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. כי המלכות שלך היא ליום מעט תמלוך בכבוד, כי לנו ככתוב בתורתך למלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך כל הארץ ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Mourner's Kaddish. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, יעמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בגלה בזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם לעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. יתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה בריחו. ילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיא חיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל יאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל יאמרו אמן. We'll do Havdalah together. Zimrad Adonai Vayehili Lishua Ushaftamayim Besason Mimaine HaYeshua Ladonai Yeshua Alamcha Birchatecha Sela Adonai Tzvahot Imanu Miskav lanu Elohei Yaakov Sela Adonai Tzevaot Ashrei Adam Notei Bav Adonai Yoshia Hamelech Yaneinu V'Yom Koreinu La Yehudim Hayta Orah Vesimcha Vesason V'Yekar Kein Tieh Lanu Kos Yeshuot Esa Uv'Shem Adonai Ekra Adonai 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 Baruch atah Adonai Mochalam Borei Pri Agafen Baruch atah Adonai Mochalam Borei Minei Besamim Baruch atah Adonai Mochalam Borei Miorei Ha'esh Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Mochalam Adu Ben Kodesh L'Chol Ben L'Choshech Ben Yisrael Mimen Yom Hashvi L'Sheishi Me Hamaseh Baruch atah Adonai Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol Chatoteinu Yimcho Zareinu V'Chaspeinu Yarbe Yarbekacho V'Kacho Chavim Balayla Zareinu V'Chaspeinu Yarbe Yarbekacho V'Kacho Chavim Balayla Tov Shavua Tov Shavua Tov Shavua Tov Shavua Tov Shavua Tov Shavua Tov Don't make people feel like thorns. In your own greatness, make them feel great as well. Am I traveling? No.
But why did you just turn off our... Oh, okay.
Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, Rabbi.
Shavua Tov, Mary, Marley, Shavua Tov, Joe. Shavua Tov, Tybal. Shavua Tov, David.
Shavua Tov.
Tybal, did your son come back from Hungary?
He did yesterday. I don't know if I told you that British Air canceled a flight. So he wound up coming back a day early. So he got back late last night, our time or whatever. So yes, he's back.
Good.
Uneventful. Thank you for remembering, but yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about
everything.
That's
Yeah.
great. I'm glad. Shavua Tov.
Yeah, you too. You too.
Thank you. Right. All right. Cool.
Don't call me Shirley. From the line from Airplane.